Hey everyone, welcome back to another paint along video. I'm Evan. I'm going to be walking you through this painting step by step, so even if you haven't painted before, you can follow along at home with me. So today we're doing
Crazy Lady Chasing the Birds.
Alright, here's what we have for the materials. We have acrylic paint, black and white. We have a large flat brush, a smaller round brush, and a little tiny detail brush. So even if you don't have these exact things at home, you can find something close to it and it should work fine. Alright, so I'm going to start out with my large flat brush. You can wet that and dry it off. We have black and white, like I said before, and I'm going to mix together. Oh yeah, keep in mind everyone, this is how you make gray. Black and white mixed together. So I'm going to make some medium gray, not too dark, not too light. And I'm going to make a horizon line. So about in the middle of the canvas, maybe a little bit higher. Go all the way across there. And I'm holding the brush flat so you get that thinner line. Now, when I go up here and do the sky, I'm going to use a little bit of a darker gray. I'm going to start off over on the left side of the canvas and just lay down some of this darker gray. And all I'm doing is doing some back and forth paint strokes. Alright, now as I get to towards the bottom, and then over here is going to be a lot lighter, so I'm going to start mixing in more white and gradually get a lot lighter once I'm over here. The easiest way to blend this is if you want to soften up any edges, just kind of go around and do these little crisscross paint strokes, and while this is all wet, it's going to be easy to blend still. When I'm doing this, I have a real small amount of paint on the brush, barely any. If you're doing all this crisscross paint strokes, if you have a ton of paint on the brush, it's going to screw everything up. So even if you rinse and dry off your brush, you can come back with an empty brush and just kind of work with what you have on the canvas here. I'll show you one more example of blending. So I'm going to put a little bit of a darker cloud here. So I darkened up my gray. Now I'm going to lay it down right here. And then right around the edges of that shape, make sure you dab off any excess paint. And I don't have a lot of paint on the brush. Like I said, if you want to rinse it off and dry it off, you can work with a clean brush and just kind of work with what's already on the canvas here. And around the edges, I'm just going to lightly brush over the edges. That's going to blend with what I already have in the background. You get that slightly darker cloud right here. This is all real foggy, so nothing is too defined. We'll put one more slightly darker cloud up here. Same way as before. I'm just going to lay it down first. Dab off the brush here and blend around the edges of that shape. Alright, so finally I'm going to put a real bright area right here, and this is going to be the light source. I'm not going to put an actual sun right here, but it's going to be the brightest part of the sky. Next we're going to take our small round brush, and I'm going to put in these rock formations here. So I'm going to start off with a real dark gray. You don't want to do it in black all the way at first, because we're going to make the darkest shadows with the black later on. So for now, you can use a real dark gray. And even if this background isn't all the way dry, it doesn't matter if it mixes a little bit. So first I'm going to outline the top of these cliffs. And at first I'm going to fill this in all just with one color, and I switch back to the big brush so it doesn't take as long. You can use whatever brush you want. And still using the darker gray, I'm going to go through and fill this all in. Once I have that done, I'm going to go back with a lighter gray, and now that we know the light source is coming from over here, so on this side of the cliffs, the one facing the light source, we're going to make that part a little lighter. So I'm going to lay down some paint here. You can decide how far this edge goes before it turns back, and the other side is in the darker part. I'm still using that big brush, but if you want to switch back to the smaller round brush, you can do that. Now I'm just putting a few highlights near the top of these lower cliffs and a little bit over here on the right. Okay, I'm using my large flat brush for this, and I'm going to start filling up the lighter part of the water. At first we're just filling up canvas, and later on I'm going to worry about adding any detail or waves too. So I'm going to start off with a real light gray, almost white. Get it right up to that land there. If you want to use that tiny brush to help you get right along the edge, you can do that. Alright, so right under this lighter part of the sky, I'm going to have lighter gray, just like the reflection. Once you get down here, just like up here, is down here, you can start making that darker. And also, once we get this covered, you want to keep in mind that when you're painting water, this is, there's a few waves in here, but generally you want to paint water going just left to right. You don't want to do anything diagonal or vertical, and you don't want to get the kindergarten waves where you're doing the little pointy tops of the waves going. So try to avoid doing that if you want a more realistic looking painting. I'm just going back and forth. once I get over here, just look up in your sky and see how dark it is, and try to at least get close to it down here in the water. It doesn't have to be exact, but just try to get a similar shade of gray. So now that I have the basic layout of the water down here, I'm going to go ahead and do the reflections of my cliffs. So I'll take a little more black on the brush. I'm still using my large brush, but if you want to switch over to that smaller round brush, you can do that for this part. It all depends on what size of canvas you're using and what you're comfortable with. But I'm going to go ahead and just, not right along the top here, but just under there. I'm going to start with this darker, this is a real dark gray. And I'm going to go back and forth and try to create a similar looking shape to what I have on the top here. Alright, so keep in mind when you're painting water, if it's very calm and there's no waves at all, your reflection is going to be a mirror image of what you see on the top here. But with some distortion, usually water has a few waves in it, so the more rough the water is, the more distorted the reflections are going to be. So that's why we have these little pointed edges towards the edge of our reflections, and that's going to help us out with the wave, all those wave effects later on. Now if you want to leave the water how it is, if you want it just to be nice and calm, nothing too complicated, you can leave it just how it is. But I'm going to add a few more waves to it, so by this what I mean is I'm going to be adding just real small little ripples in here. I'm using a large brush, but I'm holding it flat ways so I can get those real thin lines. But as always, if you want to switch over to a smaller brush for anything, you can do that. And I'm going right along the edges of my land here, the land reflection, and just adding in this light gray around it. And the trick is you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're painting over. So if I want to paint over some waves here, I don't want to use black. It'll show up way too much. It'll stand out too much. You want to be more subtle with it. So if I want to make a few ripples, say in here, I'm going to make a similar shade. Just take your time with it and test it out. If it doesn't look right, just try to mix your paint again and go on top of what you just did if you need to correct it. But I'll do a slightly darker gray here. And you can always go a little bit lighter too, to blend that all in. But the area I'm working on is a lighter area, so I'm not going to do anything too dark with these waves. Down here at the bottom where it gets a little bit darker, you can really see these light gray waves down here. Another thing too is anything you do up here is far away, so keep in mind that you want to try to have these little ripples to be a little bit shorter and smaller than the ones, say, down here. That's close up, so everything down here is going to be closer up to you, and it's going to be bigger waves. So you can do a little bit bigger paint strokes down here. Now once I get over to this slightly darker gray, I'm going to go and just make sure that you follow that rule of not going too dark or too light. You want to keep close to that shade of gray that you're painting on top of. So a real slight variation, and you can continue on with your waves. Okay, finally for this reflection, I'm going to add some black to the brush. And this is going to be the darkest shade in the water anyway, so it's almost all black. And you can add that to just under your cliffs here, because the cliffs are the darkest part of this section. Okay, coming back to our rock formations here, I'm going to come back to the smaller round brush, and this time we're going to put a little more detail in these, and this is where you make them look a little bit more rocky and get all these little crevices in here. First I'm going to start off on the right side of all these little hills here, and I'm going to add some real light gray areas to this. And for this detail part, you want to use just the tip of the brush and get as many as these little random paint strokes and lines as you can. Try to make little rocky shapes with them. But the more you do with this, the more detailed it's going to look. And it's really not that hard to do. If you notice that you have too much of the same shade going on, you can always come back with a darker shade and then cover up anything that you went kind of crazy on to break it up a little bit, or just to add some shadows in there. Go over here, now this smaller hill, it looks pretty dark over here, but if you get that black on there, you're really going to get some shadows. And once I come over here, this is right under the light source, so the top of the land is going to be a little bit lighter, and most of the shadows are going to be down below here underneath. Just a few little lines coming through here. And just tone down some of those edges a little bit. It's okay if you have some edges in there, some real defined rock edges. And then finally I'll come in here and maybe add some slightly darker shadows than what I have on this side. So this is more of a medium gray. And now I'm just adding in some last little highlights here. I'm going to go pretty bright with this compared to the rest. And you don't want to do a whole lot with this. These are just real quick paint strokes in here. Mainly they're near the top, facing your light source. And next I'm going to draw the lady in the water. And first I'm going to draw it out with some chalk. So I have a piece of chalk here and I just sharpened it with some sandpaper. And you can freehand this, or if you want to get some kind of stencil and cut it out, trace the stencil, and you can do it either way. So I'll draw the lady here. Alright, it's kind of hard to see, but I sketched that in with the chalk as a guideline. And next I'm going to be outlining it with some black paint. Next we're going to add a reflection just under our lady here, and I got this small little detail brush. I'm going to use black paint and dark gray pretty much all together here, and I'm going to leave a little space between her and the reflection, and I'm just going to go through and do these little paint strokes, leaving some of that light gray from the water behind and in between the reflection. So that way you have some waves going there, it's not too hard to get that effect. And then just do a similar shape to whatever's up here. And I'm going to make some medium gray, you don't want it too light. And I'm just going to go up top here and add a few highlights to her hair. Just real small little paint strokes. And as I'm going, I'm following the curve of her head, and that'll help give it some dimension. So over here, it's more curved. In the middle, I'm just doing straight up and down. And then once I come over here, it's going to follow the curve of the head. You can do a little more on the outside here, but don't add too much. We want all this to be more of a silhouette. I'll hint at some highlights down here where the hair ends. And if you want to throw a few highlights on her shoulders, you can do that at the top. And maybe the side of the arm. The good thing about this is if you do something that doesn't look right, you can always just paint it over with black again. Add in these little birds here, and I'm using the little tiny brush. And that's pretty much it for this painting. I'm going to add a few more little light reflections here near the edge of the water to define where the water meets the land. Alright, here's our finished result. And I hope you all had fun painting with me today. I'll see you next time.